I'm Yoram Solomon, and this is the Book of Trust. Chapter 1. What is trust? A culture of success. In October 2008, the economy plummeted into what seemed at the time to be a death spiral. A year earlier, the Dow Jones was at all-time high of 14,164 points, and in October of 2008, it passed through 10,000 on its way to its 6,547 point bottom in March of 2009. But in October of 2008, there was no way to know that it will eventually bottom. At the same time, while I was working at Texas Instruments, I started hearing rumors of an impending major reduction in force, or RIF. I felt that there was a distinct possibility that my position could be eliminated in that RIF. My older daughter Maya was 9 years old, and my younger Shira was 7. And on top of everything, it was time for me to pick a topic for my doctoral dissertation. Through the residencies in my university, I heard multiple times that a good dissertation is a done dissertation. I was told that only 25% to maybe 31% of the students who start working on their dissertation ever finish it. So, with that in mind, I aimed low. I wanted a topic that I could start and finish, get my doctoral degree, and move on with my life, and nobody gets hurt. But my mentor, Corty, had other ideas. As I proposed several dissertation topics to him, he kept knocking them down. Nothing was good enough for Corty. It was as if I was aiming too low, which I'll admit I was. He then told me that he wanted me to choose a topic that will improve my life and the lives of others. That was a pretty tall order. I was getting increasingly annoyed with the process until he asked what would become a pivotal question in my life. What pisses you off? In my head, my reaction was going to be, well, you. But I somehow overcame it, and the words that came out of my mouth were, why are people so much more creative when they work in startups than when they work in large, mature companies? Then came a few seconds of silence, after which Corty said, I think we have a topic. You see, I've worked in many startups. Back in Israel, in Silicon Valley, startups that I joined, even a startup that I started in the spare bedroom of our apartment in Kfar Saba before we had the girls. But at the time of choosing a topic, I had been working for Texas Instruments for over 6 years then. Texas Instruments, having more than 35,000 employees, $14 billion in revenue, and 57 years in existence, was anything but a startup. I felt a difference in the level of employee creativity and engagement, but couldn't put my finger on the cause. For the next 2 years, I interviewed people who have worked in both startups and mature companies in the US, China, Europe, Israel, and Canada. I analyzed what I learned and published it in a 348-page dissertation. After completing the first 3 chapters, the introduction, literature review, and research methodology, I presented it to my dissertation committee, chaired by Corty, and they approved it. After 2 years of research, I submitted the 4th chapter, that's the findings, and the committee approved that too. On a Sunday afternoon, I called Corty to let him know that I had completed the 5th and last chapter, discussion. He suggested I send it to him, but I asked for 1 more week to clean it up a little bit. We agreed that I will send him the complete dissertation that he mentored me through by the end of that week. However, Corty went to sleep on Monday night and didn't wake up Tuesday morning. He died in his sleep. He didn't get to see the completed dissertation, how I defended it, or get to attend my doctoral graduation ceremony. But he made a lasting impact on my life. That dissertation changed the course of the rest of my life, and I'd like to think that, as he would have wanted, it changed my life, and will change the lives of others. The dissertation was dedicated to him. In 2015, I turned 50, and I started wondering, what will I do when I retire? I was an executive vice president of corporate strategy for a public technology company at that time. I realized that the three things that I loved to do the most were to learn new things, to write, and to teach. I didn't take long to realize that those were things that I could do as my main source of income too. Why would I have to wait until that arbitrary age of 65 or 70 or any other number? Why wouldn't I do it now? So I did. This is my 12th book, and it joins hundreds of articles and hundreds of workshops and keynotes that I have delivered. I found that I was going to do that for the rest of my life. And it all started with my doctoral dissertation, mentored by Cordy. May he rest in peace. But what does all of that have to do with trust? Keep reading or listening or watching. One of the most annoying questions I got after telling people about my doctoral research was, well, what is it? What makes people so much more creative, or what makes people so much more creative in startups than in large mature companies? This question was annoying because I spent 2 years and wrote 348 pages in answering that question. And you expect me to give you the answer in just 2 sentences? But over time, I realized that I could give the answer with 2 words: innovation culture. Against every case in which a participant in my study reported being more creative in a mature company, 6 described the opposite. The factors with the largest positive impact on employee creativity were the autonomy that they received, external challenges that they were exposed to, the ability to see the big picture, and their ability to know what impact they made on the success of the team or the company, the respect that they held for their supervisor, and finally, the dynamics in their team. The factors with the largest negative impact on employee creativity were internal challenges and formalization. It took me several more years to refine those categories. I now see them as vertical factors across hierarchical lines between leaders and followers, and horizontal factors between team members at the same hierarchical lines. This was also the time in which I realized that the culture in the organization affected much more than creativity and innovation. It affected productivity and overall performance. Leadership and followership. A positive vertical culture takes place when leaders give their followers autonomy and when followers hold themselves accountable. Both of those roles require risk tolerance. A leader who gives autonomy is willing to let employees experiment, try new things, and fail without adverse consequences. An accountable employee is willing to try new things and fail without fear because that's the right thing to do. A negative vertical culture happens when leaders use bureaucracy, formalization, and policies to control their employees. We often like to call it micromanagement. It happens when failure carries adverse consequences to the employees to the point in which they are afraid to even try. As a result, those employees will engage in CYA, cover your ass, behavior that will do only what the company policies or their boss's precise instructions say. They will exhibit zero accountability and will never try new things, even if they knew those were the right things to do for the company, due to fear of the consequences. Because nobody ever got fired for choosing IBM. Teamwork. The second dimension of a culture of innovation is the horizontal one, the one that involves peers or colleagues at the same organizational level. We call it teamwork. One day, as I was still thinking about how to describe the teamwork aspect of culture, I stepped into an Einstein Brothers bagel shop for lunch. There were 2 Israelis sitting by the window arguing. You couldn't miss it because they were raising their voices at each other. Other restaurant patrons couldn't understand what they were saying as they were arguing in Hebrew. But being born and raised in Israel, I understood every word. Soon they started using their outside voices, causing other people in the restaurant to move away from them. Nobody would tell them to lower their voices, though. I was fascinated. Their argument, although using some high tones, was not personal. It wasn't emotional, albeit it was passionate. It was professional. They obviously had opposing thoughts about a project that they both had worked on and were arguing their positions, but at no point I felt that their argument became personal, emotional, or irrational. At some point they realized that people were looking at them, that they felt embarrassed and lowered their tones. I just smiled because they helped me realize what made for good teamwork: the ability to conduct a constructive disagreement. The type of disagreement where you can passionately argue, but never let it become personal, and you never let yourself become emotional or irrational. And like the opposite of autonomy was bureaucracy, and the opposite of accountability was CYA, I wonder what was the opposite of constructive disagreement. We have plenty of examples of that. On one hand, it's destructive disagreement. It's when disagreement stops being professional and becomes personal, causing both sides to become emotional and irrational. This is when you are stupid and not your ideas anymore. This is the level of political polarization that we have today. But there's yet another undesired type of disagreement: the politically correct one. Don't get me started on that again. I actually already started when I published my 8th book, Cause of Death: Political Correctness, in 2018. The politically correct argument is characterized by avoiding the controversial issues. It's when we hold the meeting before the meeting after the meeting, just not the meeting during the meeting. It's when we care less about the essence of our argument and more about how we appear to interact. It's when our words and our nonverbal communications convey different things. And there you have it. A culture of innovation and productivity is characterized vertically by leaders who give their followers autonomy and as followers who assume accountability. And it is characterized horizontally as exercising constructive disagreement. But what gives you the ability to practice those? Voluntary vulnerability, feedback, and receptivity. You must be capable and willing to do 3 things. The first is to be vulnerable. It is your willingness to ask stupid questions and suggest stupid ideas. How many times did you not ask a question or you didn't suggest an idea because you're afraid it would make you look stupid? I was very specific in referring to this as voluntary vulnerability, and the distinction is important. One morning, as I was waiting to meet someone at the restaurant, I noticed 2 people sitting at the table next to me. Those were not the same Israelis from Einstein Brothers. The man appeared to be a hiring manager, and a young woman who joined him a few minutes after he arrived appeared to have been an applicant to a position in his group reporting to him. I noticed that some of the questions he asked were somewhat personal and possibly beyond the scope of a professional working relationship. Now, don't get me wrong, I keep very few things personally, and in general, I'm very open and allow myself to be vulnerable. Voluntarily. However, when she replied to his questions, I could feel the apprehension in her tone of voice and body language. She answered his questions, but wasn't comfortable doing that. She answered them because she wanted the job, not because she wanted to answer them. She allowed herself to be vulnerable, but not voluntarily. This is an important distinction, as the type of vulnerability required to build a culture of innovation and productivity is voluntary vulnerability and not an involuntary one. The second thing you must be able to do is to provide direct, non-sugar-coated, unfiltered feedback. You know that you don't agree with everything that I say. You know that you have feedback, and you will not just keep it to yourself. The only question is whether you will provide it to my face or behind my back. If you disagree with something I said, or did or didn't tell me, we won't be able to hold a constructive disagreement. And finally, you must be receptive to the feedback that you get. You may not accept it, and you may not agree with it, but you must be receptive to it. When I became an executive in a public technology company in Silicon Valley back in 2000, I participated in the monthly executive retreats. Part of those retreats was the hot seat session. Each one of us, in his or her turn, would sit at the hot seat and receive feedback from the other executives on the team. I still remember the words of Tom Capizzi. He was the vice president of human resources in that company. He said, "Remember that 10% of the feedback that you are about to hear is real, but 100% of it is real in perception. You must accept the feedback that you are getting either as real or as how people see you. But you can't argue with the fact that this is their perception." The foundation of everything. It's great to sit here on the other side of this book and tell you what you must do. You must give autonomy as a leader. You must hold yourself accountable as an employee. You must be willing to hold a constructive disagreement. But the reality is you can't do any of those without the next three. Of course, it's very easy for me to say that you must be willing to be vulnerable with your boss, your employee, and your peers. You must be willing to provide direct feedback, and you must be receptive to that kind of feedback from others. But I really can't make you do any of those things. You must be willing to do those voluntarily, not because I said that you must do them. First, I must explain why you may not be willing to do any of those things. It's simple. It's because of fear. Fear is really your unwillingness to accept the negative consequences of doing any of those. The reason you will not give your employees autonomy or try things is because you're afraid of the consequences to you from their potential mistakes. After all, the buck stops with you, and a mistake made by your employees is your responsibility. The reason you will not hold yourself accountable and try things for which you didn't get a specific permission is because you are afraid of the consequences to your job security, livelihood, your ability to pay the rent and have healthcare insurance. The reason you will not be willing to be vulnerable with the others is because you are afraid of what they will do with the personal information you just provided them. Will they use it against you? Will they tell others how stupid your idea was, or maybe how stupid you are? Will they make fun of you behind your back? The reason you are not willing to give direct feedback is because you are afraid of how the others will take your feedback. Will they make it personal? Will they take it personally and become emotional and irrational? Will they retaliate against you? Will they try to hurt you in return? Finally, and the reason that you are not going to be receptive to the feedback that you get is because you are afraid of the hidden agenda behind that feedback. You are afraid that accepting that feedback will end up hurting you. Let's summarize. The reason people don't do any of those things, which are the foundation of a productive and innovative culture, is fear. What is fear then? It is the perception of the risk that you expose yourself to. And what helps you mitigate that fear? Trust. Often, prospective customers ask me about my work in building trust. It is better than other methods to improve productivity, efficiency, innovation, and other positive characteristics in the organization. How does our trust model compare to what other consulting firms offer? My answer is simple. Have you ever seen images of an area that has been hit by a major tornado? Everything is destroyed. Everything is scattered. Cars are flipped over. Even large 18-wheel trucks. Homes are shredded into pieces, blown by wind. Only one thing remains intact: the foundation. That concrete slab didn't move an inch. It's as if it couldn't care less about the tornado that had just passed by. I explained that all those methods to improve the organizations are great, but if you start with them, it's like building your house starting at the second floor. I discovered this when I helped companies generate new ideas to find that these ideas didn't stick. They didn't stick because those companies didn't have a culture of innovation. But they didn't have a culture of innovation because they didn't have trust. You must start building your house at the foundation. Only once you have solid foundation, you can build the first floor. And only once you build the first floor, you can build the second one, and so on. Before you want to deploy any of those methods to improve your organization in any possible way, build the foundation of trust first.